Oh shit, I remember sitting at my kitchen table a few years ago with a cheap lukewarm cup of black coffee staring at my laptop screen, feeling completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of investment options out there. Man, I had this raw burning pit in my stomach because I knew that if I left my hard-earned savings sitting in a standard commercial bank account, inflation was just going to quietly eat it alive like a slow-moving parasite. But at the exact same time, the thought of throwing my money into hyper-volatile individual stocks or sketchy meme coins felt like taking my rent money down to a sketchy basement casino and putting it all on red. And that is when I stumbled upon a story about an ordinary corporate guy named John who found himself standing at that exact same financial crossroads with a crisp $10,000 in cash. John did not want to play the stressful day trading game. He did not want to stare at flashing green and red stock charts for 8 hours a day while his blood pressure went through the roof. So he decided to ask a deceptively simple question: what actually happens if you take $10,000 and put it completely across the three absolute best Fidelity index funds on the market today? And what John discovered next is something that completely blew his mind and honestly changed the entire way I look at structuring wealth for the long-term piece. See, the final answer to John's question does not just depend on the specific funds you buy, it depends entirely on how the underlying portfolio actually gets built. With one specific structural framework, John ends up getting paid an incredible $2,000 every single month in pure passive income for the rest of his natural life. With the exact other framework using the exact same $10,000 and the exact same three Fidelity index funds, that modest account grows into a massive fortune of nearly $700,000. In this video breakdown, we are going to look closely at how John takes that $10,000 seed money and strategically invests it across the three best Fidelity index funds the platform has to offer. One fund specifically chosen for high dividends, one fund meticulously built for pure explosive growth, and one fund designed to give him total international exposure outside the US borders. Then, he builds two completely different parallel portfolios out of those exact same three underlying assets. One portfolio is heavily tilted for immediate and long-term cash flow income, while the other portfolio is aggressively tilted for maximum capital appreciation and growth. And by the time we get to the very end of this breakdown, I am going to show you the exact math of how one portfolio pays him $2,000 a month for life, and how the other one turns that same $10,000 into a $700,000 mountain of wealth. So here's exactly where John starts his journey. He spent days looking at literally every single index fund that the Fidelity platform offers to retail investors. And he kept coming back to the exact same three core pillars: one for reliable income, one for aggressive growth, and one for capturing everything that happens outside the geopolitical borders of the United States. The reality is that every single investment portfolio worth building on this planet needs all three of those specific jobs handled properly if you want to survive. And based on historical data and cost efficiency, these specific funds handle those jobs better than almost anything else in the financial industry. Now, before we dive deep into the specific tickers, let us establish some quick foundational context here because it removes a lot of the artificial complexity that Wall Street uses to confuse regular folks. A Fidelity index fund is essentially just a giant low-cost basket of stocks that strictly follows a preset, automated rule. There is no overpaid, slick-talking hedge fund manager sitting in a glass tower picking and choosing which stocks are going to be winners or losers this week. The automated fund just naturally owns whatever stocks are inside the specific index it is built to track. And that exact lack of human management is the reason why the internal fees are so incredibly low, and why these specific funds work so beautifully over long periods of time. Now, let us look directly at those three specific funds that John picked out for his experiment. The very first fund on his list is FDV, which is the official ticker for the Fidelity High Dividend ETF. This is the specific foundational engine that was built from the ground up to pay John real cash flow. It automatically tracks large cap and mid cap United States companies that pay consistently high dividends and are fundamentally expected by analysts to keep growing those payouts over time. But when John opened up the fact sheet to look at the top holding positions inside this dividend fund, he saw some massive names that you already know incredibly well. We are talking about technology powerhouses like Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, and Broadcom sitting right at the top of the list. And if you are sitting there watching this thinking to yourself, wait a minute, those are tech growth companies. Those are not traditional dividend stocks. That is a totally fair and normal reaction. Man, most regular everyday investors picture dividend funds as a boring, sleepy collection of old-school utility companies and legacy energy providers. But here is the massive structural shift that is happening in the modern economy right now under our noses. These massive technology giants have grown so utterly massive, and they generate such an ungodly amount of pure free cash flow that even a tiny percentage of their profits translates into massive dividend payouts in raw dollars. Apple alone paid out over a staggering $15 billion in cash dividends to its shareholders last year. So FDV is not just desperately chasing artificial high yields from dying, sleepy legacy companies that have no future. It is actively holding the biggest, most intensely profitable and dominant businesses in the entire history of the world, and at the exact moment we are living through right now. Those dominant businesses are starting to aggressively return real cash income back to their shareholders. Now let us do a quick grounding note on what a corporate dividend actually is in the real world. A dividend is simply a direct piece of a company's real profits that gets paid back into the pockets of the shareholders, usually every 3 months like clockwork. The more individual shares of the fund you own, the bigger the cash check hitting your brokerage account is going to be. That is the whole game when you look closely at the underlying metrics. FDV currently runs at roughly a 2.8% dividend yield with a massive 5-year dividend growth rate of 10.85%. And an annual share price appreciation of 9.16%. And that exact combination of current yield mixed with double-digit growth is what makes it the ultimate income engine of John's entire plan. So that is job number 1 completely handled. Income is fully covered. But now John needs to secure the growth side of the equation. The second fund on his list is FNCMX, which is the Fidelity Nasdaq Composite Index Fund. This is the specific weapon built for the sole purpose of growing the total account balance as fast humanly possible. It tracks the entire performance of the Nasdaq Composite Index, which represents around 3,000 individual companies heavily weighted toward technology, biotechnology, and cutting-edge innovation. And let us establish some quick context here because this specific detail trips up a lot of beginner investors. The Nasdaq itself isn't a single fund or an individual company. It is a physical stock exchange. Most of the big, dominant tech companies in the world choose to list their stock on that specific exchange, which is why any fund that tracks the Nasdaq Composite naturally ends up being incredibly tech-heavy. The top holding positions inside FNCMX are Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, and Meta. Yes, you are seeing some of the exact same names as FDV in some cases, but they are held at very different mathematical weights inside the fund. FDV picks them strictly for their stable dividends, whereas FNCMX picks them for their explosive growth potential. And you can see that difference clearly when you realize that the tech holdings percentage inside FNCMX sits at around a massive 50%. The raw historical numbers clearly tell that story. FNCMX runs at a tiny dividend yield of only 0.48% with a 6.91% dividend growth rate, but it boasts a massive 17.45% annual share price appreciation over time. And that 17.45% growth rate is the absolute highest of any of the 3 funds we are discussing in this video. So now John has his income engine and his growth engine locked down, but everything in the portfolio so far is entirely American. A truly resilient portfolio that can survive global turmoil also needs deep international diversification. The third fund John selected is FTIX, which is the Fidelity Total International Index Fund. This is the specific piece that gives John direct exposure to literally everything that happens outside the borders of the United States. It tracks over 5,000 individual stocks across both developed markets and rapidly emerging markets, basically encapsulating the entire economic world that isn't America. To give you quick context on how this is broken down, developed markets refer to stable. Established countries like Japan, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Emerging markets refer to countries with massive, rapidly growing populations and industrializing economies like India, China, and Brazil. Economies that are still growing into their full size. The top holding positions here are not exactly household names for most everyday American viewers. We are talking about international giants like Taiwan Semiconductor, Nestle Novo Nordisk, and ASML. And honestly, if I am being totally real with you, John almost skipped this fund entirely during his planning phase. International stocks have notoriously underperformed US stocks for over a decade now. So John was looking at the charts thinking, why on earth would I buy something that has been consistently losing the comparison test year after year? But the answer is simple, because every resilient portfolio needs an asset class that does not depend on the economic fate of America. If the United States happens to enter a brutal multi-year stagnation or a lost decade, this international fund is the structural floor that holds your portfolio up. And there is something else hidden deep inside the data of FTIX that does not show up at first glance to the casual investor. FTIX runs at a very solid 2.54% current dividend yield with a 6.2% annual share price appreciation and a stunning 5-year dividend growth rate of 16.98%. Think about that for a second. That 16.98% dividend growth rate is significantly higher than either of the other 2 US-based funds. The international fund that absolutely nobody on social media talks about actually has the fastest growing dividend payout of the 3. So now John has his tools ready, income, growth, and the rest of the world. But here is the massive critical part of the puzzle that most everyday investors completely miss. Simply picking the right funds is not actually the entire decision. One of the most intensely important aspects of John's final choice is how much specific weight and percentage he gives to each fund inside his account, because those exact same 3 funds can be used to construct 2 completely different financial realities. If you tilt the percentage weights in one specific direction, the portfolio starts throwing off massive cash that pays him every month. If you tilt the weights in the opposite direction, the total account size aggregates and grows into something much, much bigger. Same $10,000, same 3 index funds, The weights he chooses to assign to each fund is where the true strategy lives. Next, I'm going to walk you through the inner workings of the dividend-tilted portfolio, the exact version that sets John up to get paid over $2,000 every single month for life. And then right after that, you will see how the growth-tilted version takes that identical $10,000 and turns it into a $700,000 portfolio. But first, let us look at how John structurally constructs the portfolio that is optimized to pay him cash. This is the dividend-tilted framework, and the percentage weights look exactly like this. A massive 50% of his money goes directly into FTIX. The international fund, 30% goes straight into FDV, the high dividend fund, and the remaining 20% goes into FNCMX, the tech-heavy growth fund. Now, if your immediate knee-jerk reaction to hearing that is, wait a minute, Felix, why on earth is the international fund getting the biggest single slice of an income? Focused portfolio, that is a completely fair and smart question to ask. Here's the mathematical answer. Remember that FTIX has the absolute highest dividend growth rate of the three funds at a blistering 16.98%. Over a long time horizon, that massive growth rate becomes the compounding engine that grows the total income stream the fastest. FDV gets a solid 30% allocation because that is where the immediate upfront dividend yield comes from, the cold hard cash hitting John's account today. And FNCMX is intentionally left at only 20% because this specific portfolio is not being built to rapidly blow up the total account balance on paper. It is built to pay him regular cash to live on. In this specific scenario, the tech growth fund simply becomes a small growth anchor that keeps the total account balance from stalling out due to inflation. And here's the interesting mathematical perspective that flips the entire framing on this. Even with a massive 50% allocated to international stocks, the domestic US side of the portfolio still adds up to a total of 50% when you combine FDV and FNCMX together. So this is not John abandoning America at all. It is John splitting his portfolio evenly between the United States and the rest of the world, while allowing the fast-growing international dividend engine to do the heavy income lifting. When you blend those three specific weights together, the dividend-tilted portfolio comes out to a 2.2% blended yield, a 13.13% blended dividend growth rate, and a 9.14% annual share price appreciation rate. And to give you a quick note on what blended means, it is just the mathematical average of the three funds once you factor in exactly how much of each fund John actually owns in his account. Here's exactly how that dividend-tilted portfolio is projected to play out for John over time based on historical compounding data. After year one, the original $10,000 investment would be worth roughly $11,134. Very modest, completely boring. Nothing dramatic to write home about, right? But after 10 years of consistent compounding, the projections show the account growing to $30,453. After 20 years, it climbs up to $103,773. And by the time we hit year 30, the portfolio is projected to reach a very healthy $416,613. But the final account size isn't actually the headline story here, man. The real headline is what that account would be actively paying John in cold hard cash every single month. By year 30, this dividend-tilted portfolio is projected to pay John an incredible $2,048 every single month for the rest of his life. That is $24,577 a year in pure passive income hitting John's bank account whether the broad stock market is up, down, or moving sideways. Out of the total $416,613 in the account, the original $10,000 grew by adding $406,613 on top. $255,067 of that total growth came from pure capital appreciation, which means the underlying share prices simply went up over time. The remaining $151,546 came entirely from automated dividend reinvestment. Let us pause and establish quick context on what dividend reinvestment actually means in practice. When these companies pay out their quarterly dividends, instead of taking that cash out to buy expensive dinners or sneakers, John has his account set up to automatically use that cash to buy more fractional shares of the exact same fund. Those brand new shares then start paying their own dividends next quarter, which are used to buy even more shares, which pay even more dividends over a 30-year time horizon. That compounding snowball effect becomes absolutely enormous, man. And that is exactly why almost 37% of John's total projected growth in this portfolio comes entirely from dividends compounding heavily on top of themselves. That is not a small, trivial number. That means nearly 4 out of every $10 of wealth generated by this portfolio was created completely by the income side of the engine. So that is the first version built structurally to pay John an immediate and growing lifestyle check. A projected $416,613 total balance, throwing off over $2,048 a month. But that is only one way to play the game, and John knows there is another version of himself watching this play out. A version of him that does not care about getting a monthly cash check right now. A younger version that just wants to build the absolute biggest possible pile of cash at the very end of the timeline. So what happens when John takes those exact same 3 Fidelity funds and weights them in the completely opposite direction? Well, the percentage weights flip almost completely on their head. A massive 70% of his money now goes directly into FNCMX. The the tech-heavy NASDAQ Growth Fund. 20% goes into FDV, the dividend fund, and only a tiny 10% stays in FTIX. The international fund, the underlying investment reasoning shifts completely here. FNCMX gets a massive 70% slice because its historical 17.45% annual appreciation is the highest of the three funds by a massive margin. And this growth portfolio wants to ride that technology wave as aggressively as possible. FDV drops down to just 20% because in a growth-tilted asset structure, current dividends are not the priority at all. It is just enough to keep a tiny bit of income stability in the picture without slowing down the core speed of the account. And FTIX drops down to a mere 10%. International diversification still technically matters to John, but at this tiny weight, it is used as a minor psychological hedge, not a core wealth building position. So with these brand new weightings assigned, the growth tilted portfolio runs at a 1.15% blended dividend yield, an 8.71% blended dividend growth rate, but with a massive 14.67% annual share price appreciation rate. And in this specific setup, that 14.67% growth rate is what is going to do almost all of the heavy lifting for his wealth. So if the singular goal is a massive account balance, this is exactly what the data looks like. After year one, the portfolio would be worth $11,582, which is almost completely identical to the dividend version at that stage. But after 10 years, the historical projections show it growing to $42,454. The wealth gap between the two strategies is starting to open up wide. After 20 years, the growth portfolio skyrockets to $173,989. And by the time you reach year 30, the portfolio is projected to reach an absolute mountain of money.